There is a moment in almost every person's life when they realize something uncomfortable. Being a good person does not automatically make people respect you. You can be generous. You can be loyal. You can answer every message. You can help everyone who asks. You can explain yourself when you are misunderstood. You can make yourself available at any hour. And somehow, the more you give, the less some people seem to value you. Why? The first rule is simple, but almost everyone gets it backwards. Stop trying to prove your worth. The moment you feel the need to convince someone that you are intelligent, successful, attractive, capable, loyal, or important, you have already placed your value in their hands. You are no longer operating from certainty. You are operating from the need to be approved. And people can feel that difference immediately, not because they can read your mind, but because desperation changes behavior. You talk more than necessary. You explain yourself when nobody asked. You defend decisions that should not require defense. You seek reassurance. You become overly agreeable. You try to impress people instead of simply allowing your actions to speak. The harder you work to convince someone of your value, the more obvious it becomes that their opinion matters to you. Think about someone who walks into a room and immediately starts telling everyone how successful they are. They mention their achievements, their connections, their intelligence, their experience, and everything they have accomplished. They may genuinely be successful, but the constant need to announce it creates a strange psychological effect. Instead of making people think, this person is impressive, it can make them wonder, why does this person need me to know? Contrast that with someone who has nothing to prove. They don't rush to dominate the conversation. They listen. They observe. When their expertise is needed, they speak. When they have nothing useful to add, they remain silent. Their confidence does not need an advertisement because their behavior consistently supports it. This is one of the most important distinctions between confidence and insecurity. Confidence is not the absence of weakness. It is the absence of desperation to hide weakness. A secure person can admit, I don't know. They can say, I was wrong. They can walk away from an argument without needing the final word. They can allow someone to misunderstand them temporarily without immediately launching into a 10-minute explanation. They understand that one moment does not define their entire identity. Their value is built from patterns, not performances. When you stop proving yourself, you also become much harder to manipulate. People often control others by challenging their identity. They question your intelligence, and suddenly you feel compelled to demonstrate how intelligent you are. They question your strength, and you feel pressured to become aggressive. They question your success, and you start listing accomplishments. They ignore you, and you chase their attention. They withdraw approval, and you work harder to earn it. Notice the pattern. Someone else presses a psychological button, and you immediately respond. They don't need to control your body because they already control your behavior. The solution is not to become cold or arrogant. It is to become internally anchored. You need to know what you bring to the table before anyone else has the opportunity to evaluate it. If you know you are developing your skills, keeping your promises, improving your discipline, and building something meaningful, then one person's opinion cannot completely redefine you. You may listen to criticism. You may learn from it. But you don't collapse because someone failed to recognize your value. The strongest proof of worth is rarely what you say about yourself. It is what repeatedly happens because you were there. You solve problems. You create results. You keep your word. You remain composed under pressure. You become reliable without becoming desperate. You develop expertise instead of constantly announcing potential. You become someone whose actions create evidence. And this changes the way people experience you. Instead of asking them to believe you are valuable, you give them opportunities to observe it. Instead of saying, you should respect me, you conduct yourself with standards that communicate what you will and will not accept. Instead of demanding attention, you become interesting enough that attention naturally follows. Instead of chasing validation, you invest your energy into becoming stronger, more capable, and more disciplined. There will always be people who underestimate you. Let them. Sometimes being underestimated is an advantage because it removes the pressure to perform for an audience. You don't need to correct every false assumption. You don't need to reveal everything you know. You don't need to win every argument. Let your results accumulate quietly. Let your consistency become undeniable. Let time expose what words cannot prove. The goal is not to make everyone believe you are valuable. That is impossible, and trying to accomplish it will make you dependent on everyone else's judgment. The goal is to become so grounded in your own standards that recognition becomes a consequence rather than a requirement. And your behavior no longer changes simply because someone refuses to give you the approval you wanted. The second rule is to become difficult to replace, not by making yourself indispensable through manipulation, but by developing qualities that are genuinely rare. Most people spend their lives trying to be liked, accepted, and included. They become agreeable because they think being easy to deal with will make others value them. But being convenient is not the same as being valuable. If anyone can provide what you provide, solve what you solve, or bring what you bring, then your position can easily be filled by someone else. Real value begins when you develop something that cannot be duplicated quickly. Look at the people who command attention without demanding it. They usually possess something specific. Maybe they have exceptional judgment. Maybe they can remain calm when everyone else becomes emotional. Maybe they understand people better than most. Maybe they have mastered a technical skill, built a strong reputation, or developed the ability to solve difficult problems under pressure. Their value doesn't come from constantly telling people how important they are. It comes from the fact that their presence changes the outcome. This is where you need to stop asking, how can I make people like me? And start asking, what can I become exceptionally good at? The first question makes you dependent on external approval. The second puts you in control of your development. If you want respect, build competence. If you want influence, develop judgment. If you want people to take you seriously, become someone whose decisions consistently produce results. Rare value is created through repetition. You don't become difficult to replace because you discovered one clever trick. You become difficult to replace because you spent hundreds or thousands of hours developing something other people neglected. While everyone else was searching for shortcuts, you were building depth. While everyone else was trying to appear impressive, you were becoming capable. Eventually, the difference becomes visible. Think about a person who can walk into a chaotic situation and immediately identify what matters. Everyone else is reacting emotionally, but this person remains calm and asks the right questions. They understand the problem, separate facts from noise, and make a decision. That ability becomes valuable because it cannot be produced instantly. It was built through experience, observation, and disciplined thinking. The same principle applies outside of work. In relationships, being valuable doesn't mean constantly giving gifts, attention, or favors. It can mean becoming someone with emotional stability, integrity, perspective, and depth. A person who can listen without immediately judging, communicate without creating unnecessary drama, and maintain their standards without becoming cruel develops a quality that is increasingly rare. But there is an important warning here. Do not confuse being difficult to replace with making yourself difficult to work with. Some people think power means becoming unpredictable, arrogant, or intentionally complicated. They believe that if everyone needs them but hates dealing with them, they have won. They haven't. That creates dependence, not respect. And dependence built on frustration eventually creates resentment. The goal is different. You want people to think, this person brings something valuable that I don't easily find elsewhere. That might be your expertise. It might be your reliability. It might be your ability to see opportunities. It might be your discipline. It might be your ability to remain rational when emotions take over. Whatever it is, make it real. And once you identify it, protect it. Don't give away your best work to everyone who demands it. Don't allow people to continuously exploit your abilities without reciprocity. Value does not mean unlimited availability. In fact, the more valuable your contribution becomes, the more carefully you should decide where to invest it. There is also a psychological shift that happens when you become genuinely competent. You stop needing to perform confidence. When you know you can handle difficult situations, you don't need to convince people that you're fearless. When you know you have valuable skills, you don't need to dominate conversations. When you know you can create results, criticism becomes information instead of a threat. This is why building rare value is one of the most powerful forms of self-respect. You stop measuring yourself by how much attention you receive and start measuring yourself by what you can actually create. You stop asking whether people recognize your potential and start producing evidence of your ability. You become less interested in being seen as exceptional and more interested in becoming exceptional through disciplined action. Eventually, your reputation begins working for you. People remember who solved the difficult problem. They remember who remained calm during the crisis. They remember who kept their promise when everyone else disappeared. They remember who brought clarity when everyone else brought noise. You don't have to remind them. Their experience becomes the proof. So choose something worth mastering. Develop a skill that takes patience. Build judgment that comes from experience. Become reliable without becoming available to everyone. Become useful without becoming a servant. Become capable without needing applause. Because when your value is real, you don't have to chase respect, demand attention, or convince people that you matter. Your absence becomes noticeable precisely because your presence consistently changes the situation. The third rule is to control access to yourself. Your attention, time, energy, and emotional availability are not unlimited resources, yet most people give them away as if they have no value. They answer every message immediately, accept every invitation, listen to every complaint, solve every problem, and remain available whenever someone decides they want attention. At first, this may look generous. But psychologically, constant availability can create a completely different effect. When people know they can access you whenever they want, they eventually stop experiencing your attention as something valuable and start experiencing it as something guaranteed. This is why boundaries are so important. A boundary is not a punishment, and it is not an attempt to control another person. It is a decision about what you will participate in and what you will not. When you establish boundaries, you communicate that your time has structure and your attention has priorities. You are telling the world through your behavior that you have responsibilities, goals, relationships, and a life that cannot be rearranged every time someone makes a demand. Think about someone who responds to every message within seconds. At first, people may appreciate the responsiveness, but eventually, they begin expecting it. If you suddenly take an hour to respond, they may ask what happened. If you don't answer immediately, they may become annoyed. The problem isn't that you became less caring. The problem is that your availability became a standard. What was once a favor became an obligation. This happens in relationships, friendships, workplaces, and families. The person who always says yes eventually becomes the person everyone expects to say yes. The person who constantly solves other people's problems becomes the person everyone calls whenever something goes wrong. The person who never protects their schedule teaches everyone around them that their schedule doesn't matter. You don't need to become unreachable. You need to become intentional. There is a powerful difference between being available because you choose to be and being available because you are afraid of disappointing someone. The first comes from strength. The second comes from insecurity. When you can say no without feeling guilty, you demonstrate that your decisions are not controlled entirely by other people's reactions. And this is where psychological freedom begins. If someone becomes angry every time you say no, you have to ask yourself whether they valued you or simply valued your compliance. A healthy relationship can survive boundaries. A manipulative relationship often becomes uncomfortable when access is restricted. Your time should reflect your priorities. If you say your goals matter but spend every evening solving everyone else's problems, your behavior is contradicting your words. If you say you want to build something important but constantly allow interruptions, you are training yourself to treat your own ambitions as secondary. The people who command genuine respect usually understand this instinctively. They don't necessarily announce that they are busy. They simply are. Their attention is directed toward meaningful activities. They are building, learning, working, creating, training, thinking, or spending time with people who matter. Because their lives contain substance, they don't need to manufacture scarcity. Their availability is naturally limited by purpose. This is an important distinction. Never become unavailable simply to make someone chase you. That is a game, and games eventually become obvious. Instead, build a life that genuinely deserves your attention. When your time is occupied with meaningful pursuits, you don't have to pretend that you are difficult to reach. You simply have priorities. You should also become selective with emotional access. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your fears, insecurities, personal struggles, and private thoughts. Trust should develop gradually. The more someone demonstrates consistency, discretion, and respect, the more access they earn. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you discerning. The same principle applies to your reactions. Your attention is not only what you give through conversation, it is also what you give through emotional responses. If someone can provoke you with one sentence, they have discovered a direct line into your mind. If every criticism triggers an explanation, every insult triggers anger, and every disagreement triggers a debate, then other people can control your emotional energy simply by pressing the right buttons. Control your access, and you control your exposure. Control your exposure, and you gain more control over your focus. The goal is not to make people wonder where you are every second. The goal is to make sure that wherever you are there because you chose to be, and whatever receives your attention has earned a meaningful place in your life. The fourth rule is to set standards and enforce them. Many people believe respect comes from telling others what they expect, but words alone rarely create lasting change. People learn how to treat you by observing what you consistently accept, what you consistently reject, and what happens when someone crosses a boundary. Your behavior becomes a silent instruction manual for everyone around you. If you repeatedly tolerate disrespect, manipulation, broken promises, or careless treatment, people may eventually assume that these behaviors are acceptable, not because you told them they were, but because your actions demonstrated that there was no meaningful consequence. This is why standards are more powerful than demands. A demand says, you need to treat me differently. A standard says, if you choose to treat me this way, I will choose what happens next. The second puts control back into your hands. You cannot control another person's behavior, but you can control your participation in it. Imagine someone repeatedly cancels plans at the last minute. The first time, you might understand. The second time, you might give them another opportunity. But if the pattern continues and you keep rearranging your life to accommodate them, you are teaching them that your time is flexible and theirs is important. Eventually, resentment grows because you feel undervalued, yet your behavior continues rewarding the exact pattern that frustrates you. A stronger response is not necessarily anger. It is adjustment. You stop rearranging your schedule. You stop making them a priority when they consistently demonstrate that you are not one of theirs. You don't need a dramatic confrontation. Your behavior communicates the boundary more clearly than an argument ever could. This principle applies to disrespect as well. If someone insults you and you immediately become aggressive, you may accidentally allow them to control your emotional state. But if you calmly disengage, end the conversation, or reduce future access, you communicate something far more powerful. Disrespect has consequences, but those consequences do not require you to lose control. This is where many people misunderstand boundaries. They think enforcing a boundary means punishing someone. It doesn't. A boundary is simply a decision about your participation. If someone repeatedly violates a condition that matters to you, you change your level of involvement. You are not forcing them to behave differently. You are deciding what you will do in response. Consistency is what gives a standard its power. If you establish a boundary today and abandon it tomorrow because someone becomes angry, your boundary becomes negotiable. People quickly learn that enough pressure will make you surrender. Once they discover that, they may continue pushing because they know the boundary is not actually firm. This doesn't mean every mistake deserves immediate rejection. Strong standards leave room for human imperfection. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has bad days. Everyone occasionally fails to communicate properly. The difference is between an isolated mistake and a repeated pattern. You should pay attention to patterns because patterns reveal more than promises. A person can apologize beautifully and still repeat the same behavior. Another person might make a mistake, acknowledge it, correct it, and change their behavior. The second person demonstrates respect through action. The first may simply be using words to reset the situation without changing anything underneath it. Your standards should also apply to yourself. If you expect honesty from others but regularly lie to yourself about what you tolerate, your boundaries will never become stable. If you expect people to respect your time, but constantly abandon your own priorities, you are sending yourself the message that your commitments are not important. Self-respect begins when your private decisions match your public standards. You do what you said you would do. You leave when you said you would leave. You stop participating when something repeatedly violates your values. You don't create exceptions simply because you are afraid of losing someone's approval. And there is a deeper psychological effect. Once people realize that your standards are consistent, they no longer need to test them repeatedly. They know where you stand. This creates clarity. You become predictable in the healthiest possible way. People know that you are reasonable, but they also know that certain lines are real. You don't need to announce every boundary. You don't need to give speeches about how much respect you deserve. You don't need to threaten anyone with consequences. The strongest standards are often quiet. They appear in what you do when someone crosses a line. You become less reactive, not more. You stop arguing about basic respect. You stop negotiating with repeated disrespect. You stop trying to convince someone to value what they consistently devalue. Instead, you adjust your access, your attention, your trust, and your involvement according to the evidence in front of you until your behavior makes it impossible for anyone to mistake your standards for suggestions. The fifth rule is to master emotional control. If you want people to respect you, one of the most important things you can develop is the ability to remain composed when someone is trying to provoke you. Most people believe power comes from being louder, more aggressive, or more intimidating, but those behaviors often reveal the opposite. When someone can insult you and immediately make you angry, they have discovered a button they can press whenever they want. When they can question your intelligence and make you desperately prove yourself, they have found another button. When they can withdraw attention and make you chase them, they have discovered another. Emotional control means taking those buttons away. This does not mean becoming emotionless. Emotions are information. Anger can tell you that a boundary has been crossed. Fear can tell you that something deserves attention. Disappointment can reveal that an expectation mattered to you. The problem begins when emotion becomes the decision maker. The strongest person in the room is not necessarily the person who feels the least. It is often the person who can feel something intensely and still choose their response carefully. Think about what happens when someone insults you in front of other people. Your instinct may be to respond immediately. You want to defend your reputation. You want to make them regret speaking. You want everyone watching to know that you cannot be disrespected. But reacting instantly gives the other person control over the timing of your behavior. They created the situation, pushed the emotional button, and you followed their script. Imagine instead that you pause. You look at them. You don't rush. You don't raise your voice. You don't start explaining yourself. You decide whether the comment deserves a response at all. That pause creates psychological distance between what happened and what you choose to do next. Within that distance is your freedom. People often underestimate how powerful a pause can be. A few seconds of silence can prevent an emotional reaction from becoming a permanent decision. It gives your nervous system time to settle and your reasoning ability time to return. Instead of asking, "How do I make them pay?" you can ask, "What response actually serves me?" Sometimes the answer is a direct statement. Sometimes it is a boundary. Sometimes it is leaving. Sometimes it is documenting the behavior. Sometimes it is simply refusing to participate in the argument. The important thing is that the response comes from choice rather than emotional reflex. This becomes especially important around people who deliberately create chaos. Some people gain influence by provoking reactions. They say something offensive, then watch you become angry. They create confusion, then watch you desperately seek clarity. They withdraw affection, then wait for you to chase them. They create conflict, then position themselves as the person who can resolve it. If you become predictable under pressure, they can anticipate your behavior and manipulate it. Your advantage comes from becoming less predictable emotionally while remaining consistent in your principles. You don't need to react every time someone expects you to. You don't need to defend every accusation. You don't need to correct every misunderstanding. You don't need to win every argument. Sometimes refusing to participate is the most controlled response available. There is another dimension to emotional control, learning not to confuse disrespect with an emergency. Someone's opinion of you is not automatically a crisis. Someone disagreeing with you is not automatically an attack. Someone failing to appreciate you is not proof that you lack value. When your identity is stable, external events lose some of their ability to shake you. This is why internal confidence matters more than performance. If you know who you are, criticism becomes easier to evaluate. You can ask whether there is something useful inside it without immediately becoming defensive. If there is truth, you learn. If there is nothing useful, you move on. Either way, you remain in control of yourself. Emotional control also means controlling positive emotions. Desperation doesn't always appear as fear or anger. Sometimes it appears as excessive excitement, attachment, or the need to secure something immediately. You meet someone you admire and reveal everything too quickly. You receive praise and become dependent on more. Someone gives you attention and suddenly your priorities disappear. The inability to regulate excitement can be just as revealing as the inability to regulate anger. Slow down. Observe. Let people reveal themselves through patterns instead of making decisions based on moments. Give relationships time to develop. Give trust time to become earned. Give important decisions time to survive the first emotional wave. When you control your reactions, you change the psychological environment around you. People learn that they cannot easily push you into behavior that benefits them. They may still disagree with you. They may still criticize you. They may still attempt to provoke you. But they lose the certainty that their actions will produce the reaction they want. And that uncertainty is often where genuine self-command begins. The sixth and final rule is to build self-respect before seeking respect from anyone else. This is where everything comes together. because you can control your availability, develop valuable skills, establish boundaries, and master your emotions. But if you secretly believe that your worth depends on other people's approval, you will eventually surrender all of it just to feel accepted. External respect can never permanently compensate for internal insecurity. If you don't respect yourself, you will constantly look outside yourself for evidence that you matter. And that search can make you vulnerable to anyone who knows how to give or withhold approval. Think about how often people change themselves depending on who is watching. Around confident people, they become agreeable. Around attractive people, they become desperate to impress. Around successful people, they exaggerate their own accomplishments. Around someone who dislikes them, they become obsessed with changing that person's opinion. Their identity becomes a mirror reflecting whoever happens to be standing in front of them. They may appear socially flexible, but underneath it is a dangerous dependence on validation. Self-respect begins when you stop abandoning yourself to gain acceptance. It means you can hear criticism without automatically believing it. You can receive rejection without deciding that you are worthless. You can be misunderstood without desperately explaining every detail. You can walk away from someone who repeatedly diminishes you without begging them to recognize what they lost. This does not mean believing you are better than everyone else. In fact, genuine self-respect often makes arrogance unnecessary. Arrogance needs comparison. It needs someone to be below you so that you can feel above them. Self-respect does not require that comparison. You can recognize your strengths without denying someone else's. You can acknowledge your weaknesses without being ashamed of them. You can know that you still have work to do while refusing to treat yourself as insignificant. One of the clearest signs of self-respect is the ability to keep promises to yourself. If you say you're going to improve a skill, you practice. If you say you're going to protect your time, you protect it. If you say you will stop accepting a particular pattern of disrespect, you follow through. Every time you keep a commitment to yourself, you build evidence that your own word matters. And every time you repeatedly betray your own standards for approval, something happens internally. You teach yourself that other people's comfort matters more than your principles. You teach yourself that rejection is more frightening than self-betrayal. Eventually, you may become surrounded by people who like the version of you that you created for them while feeling increasingly disconnected from who you actually are. The solution is not to become selfish. It is to become aligned. Help people because you choose to help them, not because you are terrified they will leave if you stop. Give generously when generosity reflects your values, not when you're trying to purchase affection. Listen to others without abandoning your own judgment. Compromise when compromise is reasonable, but don't compromise the parts of yourself that you know you cannot live without. Self-respect also changes the way you handle rejection. Rejection hurts, but it doesn't have to define you. Someone can decide that they don't want a relationship with you, don't want your service, don't want your friendship, or don't agree with your perspective. Their decision may be disappointing, but it is not a universal verdict on your worth. When you understand this, you stop chasing closed doors. You also become more selective about where you invest your energy. Not every person deserves access to your deepest thoughts. Not every disagreement deserves your attention. Not every relationship deserves endless repair attempts. You begin evaluating people by their patterns rather than their promises, and you become willing to leave situations where your presence consistently requires you to shrink. The irony is that this is often when external respect begins to increase. When you no longer need everyone to approve of you, your behavior becomes calmer. When you no longer fear losing everyone, you become more honest. When you no longer need to prove your worth, you stop over-explaining. When you can walk away, you negotiate differently. When you can tolerate being disliked, you become harder to manipulate. The goal was never to force everyone to respect you. The deeper goal was to become someone whose respect for themselves cannot easily be taken away. Build value, protect your time, enforce your standards, control your emotions, keep your word to yourself. Let your actions create the evidence that your mind needs, because when you genuinely respect yourself, you no longer walk into every room asking, "Do they think I'm valuable?" You walk in asking, "Does this environment deserve my energy?" You stop chasing people who require you to prove your worth. You stop negotiating with disrespect. You stop performing for approval. You become comfortable with silence, comfortable with distance, and comfortable with walking away when something repeatedly violates who you are. That is the point where respect becomes fundamentally different. You are no longer trying to force it from others. You are carrying it with you. And when you carry that kind of self-respect, your presence becomes quieter, your boundaries become stronger, your decisions become clearer, and your need for validation begins to disappear. Never forget, the person who needs everyone to respect them can be controlled by anyone who withholds respect. But the person who has learned to respect themselves can remain steady even when the room refuses to applaud. Build that person, protect that person, and become so grounded in your own standards that approval becomes a bonus rather than a necessity. That is where real power begins, because the moment you stop begging the world to recognize your value is the moment you finally become free to create it.